As Barry has said, the collection really began in 1990 when I was at London for the 10-year international, and we decided to launch Stamp Active there. This was an idea that came about from a visit to the Philatelic Congress of Great Britain when I was chatting to Royal Mail and to the Philatelic Trust, saying, I'd just started a stamp club at my local primary school and was really struggling with ideas and where to get help. But, it'd be nice if a pack was put together that could help people like me. And that ultimately led to them supporting and helping me develop the Stamp Active idea. In those days, it was all photocopies and folders, but these days, a lot of it is internet based. And when I went along there, the catalogue and contained souvenirs, which were reproductions of the original commemorative postal stationery from 1890. And I bought myself one of the original envelopes and sent it to myself as a souvenir. And that's how this whole thing started. And since then, I've obviously, as Barry said, built up quite a lot of material. The Victorians really wanted to celebrate this because they regarded the introduction of Uniform Penny Post as a great success. Obviously, it led to the world's first stamp, but it was actually the fact that before 1840, it was both complicated and very expensive to send a letter with the postage usually paid by the receiver. And the example I show from my collection is this letter sent from London to Somerset that was charged 8 and 4 pence. And that was the equivalent today of somebody asking, or the postman asking you for £80 for a letter from your bank. And of course, a lot of these letters were refused because people just couldn't afford to pay. So when penny postage was introduced, and it really opened up communications to the masses, and the quantities of letters that were sent, blossomed into some huge numbers very, very quickly. As I say, in London, it went from over just 100,000 to 2 million a day. So they wanted to celebrate it. And one of the first things that they did at the post office is ask De La Rue to produce some designs for what would have been our first commemorative postage stamp. And 11 essays were produced, which are shown from the book there. I've got a few in my collection. One of my favorites is the one in the middle, which is marked the best, I think, by JSP, who was the controller of stamps at the Inland Revenue. But when De La Rue told the post office that they would not only have to pay for all the new plates, but also for all the unused penny lilac plates, it was dismissed as being too expensive an idea. So the whole idea was dropped. But these hand-painted watercolors are lovely things to have. There were some bits and pieces that happened in the run-up to the event. The Rowland Hill's family had their own celebration in Hampstead. There was a bazaar, and the program of music on the right was really a trial run by the post office for a conversazione. This is basically a social gathering to celebrate Uniform Penny Post. There were no postal items for that event, just the program of music is the only thing that exists. And then the year kicked off with a dinner at the Holborn restaurant in London for 300 officials of the post office, including the Postmaster General. And I always think it's quite amusing that the Mulready design appears quite often, as it did on Rowland Hill's family's invitation you've just seen, as the place card for the dinner, with the addition of Jubilee of Uniform Penny Post. Perhaps surprisingly, the first celebration of the world's first stamp was not in this country, but in Austria. And there was an international exhibition held at the end of May, beginning of April, as what is now known as MAC in Vienna, a museum of art there, and it was really the world's first international stamp exhibition. One of the features that visitors could see were stamps actually being printed by the Austrian State Printing Works, and they used the original plates of their first postage stamp, but instead of the value, they replaced it with the date 1890. They'd actually tried this at an earlier exhibition, which was just a national exhibition in 1881. Then they were only printed in blue, but in 1890 they were printed in a huge variety of colors, on all sorts of different color papers, and they could be found perforated and imperforate, and every visitor was given one of these labels, let's call them, as a souvenir of the event, and they were printed in sheets of 16. As I hear some other examples of sheets which are in my collection. On the day that the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I visited, the labels were printed in purple, and so there's some to look out for. And as I said, this was the first international stamp competition, if you like, as well, with entries not only from the country but from various parts of the world. There were 147 entries, and here you see the certificate and one of the medals. I don't actually have the certificate in my collection, but this medal is one that I found last year. And again, stamps featured in other exhibitions around the country. One I'll just highlight is one in Edinburgh that was held for a large part of 1890, from May through to November, as part of a much larger exhibition. But there was a displays of stamps and telegraphy and an exhibition post office. And you see here some of the envelopes used by the committee, and they had intended to perhaps have a souvenir envelope produced in Scotland, but that idea is again something that was dropped. Interestingly, this CDS is sort of the elusive postal item that I haven't got in my collection. There was one offered for sale in Magpie, and the CDS on piece sold for £850. So extremely elusive. But the first big event in London was at the Guildhall, organised by the City Corporation of London over 3 days, a Friday, a Saturday. They didn't hold it on the Sunday, but there was another, the final day was the Monday, a royal event attended by the Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, and over 20,000 people took part. And it's important in philately for the fact that it generated Britain's first commemorative postal stationery and the first decorative hand stamps. And you see on the right the architect's plan from the catalogue, and you can see perhaps the main hall in Guildhall was taken over for a fully operational sorting office, displays of telegraphs as well as post offices. And this actually is where the Royal will be holding their dinner in February 2022, and where the presentations will take place of the awards for London 2022. So I'm quite looking forward to having a look round when we go. And although a lot of the Guildhall was destroyed in the war, certainly the main part here of the hall still exists. The planning by the post office for this was quite detailed, and again you can find things like tickets, instructions for duty, instructions for postal duty, showing just how much planning went into all of this. And of course this is why the collection moves out of the purely philatelic into embracing, as I say, ephemera, and therefore is now, luckily for me, in the open philately class. One of my favorite items is the invitation. This is quite a large thing, almost A3 in size, in two parts. The first part on the left was given up to get into the event, but the invitation, sorry, the part on the right was intended to be kept purely as a souvenir. And this is quite a nice item again for my collection, because it's a specimen before they added the reference number for the which differentiated the invitations. Its centerpiece is a penny black, and this was specially re-engraved to reproduce, as I say, for the centerpiece. It's a VR penny black with the letters JL, and again, proofs of that do exist. All sorts of things could be seen, and I won't list them, John, but they're shown there. One of the main highlights was that all of the mail from the EC postal district was taken to the Guildhall by mail coaches, and people would see them coming and going, and people could see all of those being sorted and stamped, and then bagged up to be taken around the country. And other displays included a field post office, a reproduction of a post office in 1790, and again, this is the 1790 post office here on a cutting from the illustrated London News. And of course there were displays of stamps and artifacts from telling the story of the post. The exhibits themselves were marked up with special labels that were produced by De La Rue. They exist in 3 sizes: large, medium and small, and I've got 1 or 2 in the collection which actually were used at the Guildhall. Here's the caricature of a Mulready envelope, and this thing here appears to be the basis of the design. It came from a scrapbook from a post office official, but where it originally came out of a book or something, I don't know. It looks to have been perhaps the frontispiece of a book, but it was used as the basis of the design for the labels. The gems of this collection are the Guildhall proofs. I don't have a full set. I've got 1, 2, 3, the penny and the halfpenny in my collection. The others only exist very well. I've only seen them in the Royal Collection, and these scans are taken from the Royal Collection, the tuppence and the penny halfpenny. I've seen some sold up for sale recently with Stanley Gibbons that look exactly the same as these, but are described as Ormond Hill die proofs. And I'm wondering, as they're virtually identical, how you actually tell the difference between a Guildhall proof and a Ormond Hill die proof. But the Inland Revenue asked Perkins Bacon to reprint a set of these stamps, especially for exhibit at the Guildhall. So both types of proof exist. Again, somebody one day might explain to me how you tell the difference. And there are all sorts of bits and pieces associated with the exhibition that form part of the collection. Tickets, as I said, carriage passes, and obviously some items of postal history. The envelope on the right here, addressed to the Prince of Wales, was actually sent by HCR, the Postmaster General Henry Cecil Raikes, and I sometimes wonder how these things get into the public domain. It was only when I was actually exhibiting this at a society that somebody pointed out to me that these were actually the initials of HCR, and I always encourage people to show their material to others, because you can always learn something from if you do that. And again, we carry on with bag labels. One of the handouts at the post office choir, and the Edison's phonographed. And here's one of these bag labels again. And this BAOB hand stamp was actually a cachet that was used at the field post office that was in one of the galleries. Telegraphy featured quite extensively. It was a relatively new innovation at that time. Few examples of actual telegrams exist, but there's one on the right from my collection. And the item in the middle is an interesting find, because many years ago, I nearly didn't buy that because it looked quite tatty. Went back ultimately to the dealer and made a small offer for it, only to find when I got it home that it contains some punch paper take. You can see the ... .. of the Morse transmitter, and the other one is a Wheatstone transmitter. And these were sent by W.H. Priest, excuse me, W.H. Priest to Constance Hill, who was Rowland Hill's niece. I mentioned in my introduction that this was important for the Britain's first commemorative postal stationery, and this is it. It's a letter card with a face value of a penny, and it was sold at the event at sixpence. The additional amount going to the Rowland Hill Benevolent Fund. It was promoted at the 1790 post office as quite an amusing flyer in old style. And although it was sixpence, the whole issue sold out in less than 3 hours on the first night. And the City of London officials tried to get some more from De La Rue, and they managed to print an additional 1,500, but that was all the paper stock they had available. And so these proved extremely successful, and some of them were overprinted as thank you cards for people who had exhibited material at the event or had helped in its organization. The other innovation was these decorative postmarks, which is an octagonal star. It comes in basically two varieties. There's a rubber hand stamp, which just has at its center a date, and this was intended to be applied as a souvenir on souvenir items, because you could get it put on anything on payment of a penny, and people had it on handkerchiefs, old stamps, old letters, and so forth. But anything went through the post and actually was handled by the sorting office had a metal hand stamp which had in the middle a changeable time code, and this basically indicated the hour of posting. But as you can see from the gap, there's not any room for additional number, so the number 11 doesn't exist. Immediately that exhibition closed, another one opened in London, organised by the London Philatelic Society, what is now the Royal. And this was again a royal event attended by the Duke of Edinburgh. And here's on the left-hand side is the lunch menu, which had on it the stamps issued between 1840, the penny stamps issued between 1840 and 1890. And you can see from the photograph at the bottom right that the style of presentation was a little different to today, because everything was in glass cases. And you could actually ask for the cases to be open to look at the albums and things that were exhibited. And again, one of the features here was the fact that you could see stamps being perforated and overprinted, and these were sold to visitors, and they're regarded as Britain's first Cinderella item, and again, they're relatively scarce. But the main event that had been planned by the post office was at South Kensington Museum, what is now the Victoria and Albert Museum. Uh, the invitation for that in the centre here is rather less grand than the one at the Guildhall, and again is relatively scarce. It was advertised quite widely with flyers, and again the planning that went into this was extremely detailed. The photograph in the middle, which I do have in my collection, you can see here the 1790 post office in the middle, and on either side post offices selling things. This was just a one-day event. Amazing that so much went into it, and virtually everything that had been at the Guildhall was at South Kensington. Again, a royal event attended by both the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, with 4,000 guests, and again, all of the things that you saw at the Guildhall you could see here, but in addition to that, there was a pneumatic tube post where you could send a message from one part of the building to the other over these pneumatic tubes, a poste restante, and an electrophonoscope was one of the things that was one of the highlights of the evening, because people could not only communicate and speak to people over a telephone, but they could see them at the same time. And this was reported in the Daily Telegraph and other newspapers as one of the wonders of the age. You've got to think what they make of Zoom these days, but it was only later on when W.H. Preece published his autobiography that he disclosed that actually it was a bit of a joke, because the only reason you could see people was because of a sequence of mirrors. It was nothing to do with electronics at all. And again, here are some of the ephemera and other items associated with the event, the instructions for postal duty. Here is, again, one of the rarities from my collection, which is one of the pneumatic tube postcards, where somebody has asked, how many Jubilee envelopes were printed, please say, and the answer from the post office official is 253 only, I have been told. He didn't get that quite right, as we'll hear in a minute. And again, special hand stamps. These were, the large one was intended to be put on postal items. The smaller circular one was for things like savings books. And then there were cachets for the 1790 post office, the 1990 post office, and 2 tube post cancels, one to send it down for a penny, but if you wanted a reply, it was charged 3d. But again, all of these could be applied on anything for payment of a penny, again with the profits going to the Rowland Hill Benevolent Fund. The post office had never intended to produce its own postal stationery for this event, but after the success at the Guildhall, they very quickly, at a meeting on the 19th of May, got together and decided they ought to do something. And they felt they couldn't have another card, so the idea came for having an envelope with a correspondence card inside. And the secretary, assistant secretary to the post office, Frederick Baines, who was chairman of the post office committee, sketched this design of what the envelope might look like. And I have in my collection a lot of the archive from De La Rue, showing the various stages that it went through, from the pencil sketch, working up elements of the design, to the finished proof. And this was advertised for sale all over the country. They were to be sold for just one day, with it being charged for £1. And in the event, over 250,000 were ordered. As the design was worked up, the Postmaster General changed the position of the train from the top to the bottom as the design progressed. The envelopes were put into wrappers of 10, so you could buy them in groups of 10, and those were then for the post office use sort of batched up again into batches of 100. The golden wrappers are, I wouldn't say common, but then, you know, they're not difficult to find. But these hundreds are very hard to find. And again, as at the Guildhall, the insert cards were overprinted as thank you cards coming from the committee. So the post office official said there were 253 sold. I say it wasn't that; it was 250,000. And here are items from my collection, and this Jubilee envelope cancelled at the Guildhall with both a penny black and tuppenny blue is unique. A few days after the exhibition closed on the 2nd of July, another version of the envelope appeared on the streets of London, and the post office were extremely unhappy about it because A, they knew nothing about it, and B, it indicated that postage had been paid of 1 penny, which was clearly not the case. And they put the official solicitor onto William Henry Elliot, who had put his name on the front of the card and where he operated from. So he wasn't difficult to find. And his excuse was that he had produced this because people were disappointed at not being able to get the card and envelope if they hadn't pre-ordered them. But Mr. Elliot was a naughty man because over the years, I've actually come across an example that was cancelled in full at South Kensington Museum with the South Kensington hand stamps. So he certainly didn't make up the idea after the closure of the exhibition, because it already knew what the design was and it already printed it before the 2nd of July. I've still not got to the bottom of how he got this inside track. And one possibility is that a member of his family actually worked for De La Rue. But he promised to destroy and give up any envelopes that he had left. So he escaped any punishment from the post office. And again, later in July, another version of the envelope appeared, which was a caricature by Harry Finesse, who was cartoonist at Punch. Colour trials exist of these, but again, I've only ever seen one set of those, and they were sent out to people around the post office, around the country, and again, they're quite entertaining because they, instead of having although it's a similar design, it's got the hard-working post office official with a huge bundle of sacks compared to the old 1840 letter carrier delivering the occasional letter. And here the train of gold going into the mouth of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So if you look at the detail here, it's quite amusing. The illustration on the card is not that of Rowland Hill, but of Henry Cecil Raikes, with "He did not give us penny postage." Again, another thing that the post office didn't approve of, a Jubilee medal was struck, a commemorative medal was struck by Spinks. It was available in white metal, bronze, silver, bronze, aluminium, and solid silver. Again, these were sent out to post offices, and the officials in London weren't very happy about it. But the medal itself is quite attractive. One of the oddities is that proofs appear to have an error on, where instead of the word system being printed in having the letter Y, examples exist with I instead of Y. And generously, when I was giving this talk to the Caledonian Society some months ago, Stuart Gardner and Margaret Morris said, "Oh, we've got one of these in bronze. Would you like it?" And they kindly gifted it to me. So I acknowledge with great thanks their generosity in adding this to the collection. And finally, at the end of the year, the post office produced a Christmas card. Again, these were sold at 6p each, and about 25,000 were sold. I think they had 2 printings of them because there is a variety where the position of the date is different, but very few were again overprinted, but to be sent out from the offices of the General Post Office in London. And I think there's only a few hundred of those printed, and only 100 examples were printed for use by the Jubilee Executive Committee. So again, these are some of the rarities in my collection. And as with many things in philately, somebody thought there weren't enough of them around, so they produced a few more. And in 1979, I think it was, Thomas Bray was arrested and charged with fraud for producing copies of of these Christmas cards. The difference is instead of they were actually printed by a photographic process. So the original card had some ink marks around the flagstaff at the bottom. So you can see, if you want to differentiate a forgery from the original card, these black marks are a constant flaw. But having said that, they basically sell for the same price, so it doesn't really make a lot of difference. But it's just an interesting part of the story. Again, I hope that's given you a good flavour for the range of material and the importance of the event. If you want to know some more, my book on this was published by the Royal, or you can also view my exhibit, as I say, at London 2022, but it's also on the Museum of Philately website if you're not going to the International. But I hope to see as many of you as possible at the London International, because it's shaping up to be a great event. So that's me done.
Thank you, John. That was really good. It's really good.